Hi, my name is Stephen McClure, and today we're going to talk about the first 15 years of Fender electric guitars. Now, 60 years ago, Leo Fender started a small company based out of California making electric guitars, lap steels, acoustic guitars, and things of that nature. Today we're going to talk about the first 15 years before the corporate buyout from CBS Musical Company. My name is Stephen McClure, like I said before. I've been playing about 18 years and collecting vintage Fender guitars for at least 15 years. Now, over this course of time, I've had several, including the 66 that I'm playing right now, down to 78s and a couple other 60s models that I carried throughout the years. Now, the thing about 60s guitars is, in the 50s and 70s even, they all have different characteristics. You can date these things based off their serial numbers, based off of all sorts of little details. I mean, some of them have numbers on the back of the pots, even on the back of the pickups on these original vintage Fender models. If you pull these pickups out on the back side, if there's going to be felt paper, and it's going to have a handwritten date for the day that those pickups were hand wound. Now, that's the difference in quality of course, the vintage pieces and the modern stuff that you get nowadays. Even down to the bottom of the neck, whenever this neck was crafted and finished, there's a pencil date that was handwritten on the bottom of the neck, and a little signature next to it telling you who made it. You'll find the same thing underneath inside the bodies as well. So that's just a little bit of information about how you date these things. Of course, on the back side as well, your older vintage Fender models carried different plates. This is from the pre-CBS, or sorry, post-CBS buyout. You have the F plates that are on the back with the engraved F. Prior ones did not have that listed on it. They carried a serial number up here at the top. The rest of the plate was plain chrome. And most of them all started with an L in front of it, which is where you get your L series that went all the way up to 1965. Now, during this speech, we're going to talk about several different models of Fenders, and starting with the original with the Broadcaster, going into the Esquires and the Telecasters, then on to the 1954 model that came out, the Fender Stratocaster, then going into 1956 with the Music Master and the Duosonics, then going into 58 with the Fender Jazzmaster, and then its little brother that came out in 1962, the Fender Jaguar, even going into 1964, whenever we had the birth of the Ford Mustang, the Ford muscle car, they came out with the Fender Mustang. Of course, going patriotic just as well for the American muscle, they had the American guitar. So, let's get started in 1950. In 1950, Leo Fender brought out the Fender Broadcaster. I wish I had an example of one here to show you, but of course these guitars are worth in the 50s and hundreds of thousands nowadays, when back in that time they were only $150, $200. It's amazing how much something so cheap then is worth now. But these guitars came out, they had two pickups on them, there's a hardtail, the body was really bulky, it's still lightweight, but they carried a logo across the headstock that said Fender Broadcaster. Now, about midway through the first year of production on the Fender Broadcaster, Gretsch Drums decided that they were going to sue Leo Fender unless he removed Broadcaster from the headstocks of these guitars, due to the fact that Broadcaster was already a trademarked name that came out on Gretsch's drum heads. Now, those guitars that came out after that, from midway through 50 through 51, were called the Fender No-Casters, and those are some of the most rare collectible guitars you can find. The only thing that it has on it is the original spaghetti logo, Fender, and that's it. Now, of course, these have been remade over the years. But after that, they were renamed the Fender Telecaster, which started late 51. And then it went on to several different models that spurred from that: the Telecaster Deluxe, the Telecaster Customs, the Telecaster Thin Lines, the Paisleys, several different models that came out through the years. But this guitar has taken the just time test of what a guitar takes. It was the first one that came out in 1950, and it's still in production today, if that tells you anything about this model. Now, after that, there was the Fender Stratocaster that came out. Now, in 1954, they released a new design, which was the Fender Strat. Now, this, of course, is not a 54 model. I could never afford one of those. Those are price range of anywhere from $100,000 up for one in decent condition. Now, this model here is a vintage piece. It is from the 80s, but it's showing the tremolo system. Now, this was the first Fender guitar to ever carry a tremolo system inside of it. What made it different? I mean, obviously, it's a tremolo. You can use it as a whammy bar, you can press the strings and get a different sound out of it. Now, the design of the electronics that came out was going from a 2 pickup to a 3 pickup, simple selector switch, and your volume and tone knobs and an input jack, and then going to the standard Strat style headstock. And this guitar has basically become the icon guitar for most famous people. A couple of people to name: Eric Clapton, his famous guitar Blackie was a 1954 Fender Strat. And then, of course, the most famous performance with the Strat that I could think of would be at Woodstock in 1969 with Jimi Hendrix. And after he finished playing the national anthem in Purple Haze, lighting the guitar aflame. That, of course, was a 1968, I do believe, Fender Strat to be torched at that event. But going on from there, the next thing that they released was the 1956 Music Masters and Duosonics. This is where they went with a cheaper, not to say cheaper quality, but a less expensive model for student learners. It was the shorter scale neck, going from the traditional 25 scale that you'd find on the Fender Stratocasters down to a 22 scale, which is incredibly small. And it was designed for people to learn how to play on, people with smaller hands. So, of course, picked up and became a little bit more popular, but the body design stuck around for ages after that. The original Music Master body design was, of course, what they ended up using in later designs with the Fender Mustangs. And then into the Broncos, and then, of course, continued into modern-day production with the Mustang as well. Now, the thing that separated this guitar from the Mustang and its later brothers, not only neck scale, but it also was a hardtail, meaning there was no tremolo system in this one. Now, after that, Fender decided to release a little bit of a jazzy construction, and that was known as the Jazzmaster, which came out in 1958. Now, this example is not one of the original Jazzmasters. This is a full-blown custom Jazzmaster. None of the electronics are the same that you would find in it. The only thing that's the same is going to be your body styling, your neck styling, and the vibrato and bridge system that I have on here. Now, this is the floating tremolo system. Once again, another new tremolo system that Fender released. And they stuck with this design, and Jazzmasters are still currently in production of modern day time. Now, in the time when the Jazzmaster was released, though, it was not a very sought-after guitar. People didn't like how complicated it was. You know, it goes from having this one little switch right here to having 3 pots up at the top where you got these 2 roller pots, a switch, a rhythm and lead circuit that you got to switch between, then another volume and tone pot down here. Too many buttons, too many switches, and people didn't understand it, so it did not go over well. One amazing thing that I liked about the original Jazzmasters was they went from the standard single coil pickups that you see in those guitars to a fat soap bar P90 pickup. It was a single coil still, big hand wound Amico magnet pickup, but just absolutely wonderful tone that came out of those pickups. You can't find that in modern day guitars. Now, in 1962, a little bit later on, they released a guitar that's Jazzmaster's little brother, so to speak. It's called the Fender Jaguar. Now, the Fender Jaguar came out and had the same body shape, maybe a slight bit of modifications done to the neck pocket. Other than that, it went into the electronics and the neck. It went from the 25 scale neck down to the 24 3/4 scale neck, which was found later on the Mustangs. Now, the Fender Jaguar carried 2 single coil pickups and went into a different set of electronics that were going into it. It had 3 slide switches down at the bottom, and then it had the roller pots up top. Once again, Too much complications, too much technology put into these guitars. And then the last guitar that I'm going to talk about is the Mustang. Now in 1964, whenever Ford released those cars, Fender released the guitars. Keeping with patriotic, they were only released in Daphne Blue, which is the example seen here, Dakota Red, and Olympic White. Now these guitars came out, they had two slide switches going across the top. Then you had your two single coil pickups, two pots, jack, and then another new style, the floating vibrato, the dynamic floating vibrato that Fender released on this guitar. A little bit different. So, as you can see, great example, this one is a vintage piece, but at the same year, the original models that came out of the Music Master and Duosonic were changed to model after the new Mustang, except instead of having the vibrato, they still had their standard hardtail, where the Music Master had one pickup. The Duosonic was identical to the Mustang, except in the features of being a hardtail. Now that brings us to the end of the production guitars that came out, electric guitars that is, that came out during Leo Fender's career with the company. Now in 1965, the company was sold to CBS Musical Instruments. Now to a lot of collectors, it's kind of the death of Fender, so to speak. It's whenever everything started to go downhill. Quality dropped. The mass production of the guitars went into effect, things of that nature. Now, at first, it seemed like it was going to be great. The new owners had a real big enthusiasm of the company, started trying to come up with all these new ideas, but then by 68, 69, they were just taking spare bodies they had laying around, trying to cut different shapes out of them and put them into the market. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, the first 15 years of Fender Musical Instruments on the electric guitar side. I appreciate your time. Have a good one.